Hello children. In this video lecture, we will learn chapter from Hornbill. Chapter 2, We Are Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together, written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. Let's know about the author. Gordon Cook is a two-time Canadian Olympic sailor. He sails for the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. He is the son of Stephen Cook and Linda Cook. He had a great interest in writing stories too. Alan East was admitted to the role of solicitors in the 2003 and has gained extensive experience as a litigator manager and legal trainer. In 2004, he co-founded and managed a niche legal practice specializing in criminal litigation and prison law, gaining higher rights of audience in criminal proceedings and working as a duty solicitor. Alan is a co-founder of a multi-academy trust, Central Academies Trust, which has as its aim improving standards in secondary education. Let's know about the chapter. This chapter is a first-person account of an adventurous journey that a family experiences. The chapter revolves around a part of the round-the-world voyage undertaken by the narrator and his family in a sailboat. It describes their thrilling journey across the sea and their close encounter with death during their voyage. The plot talks about their possible attempts to save their lives. The story tells us about how they fought each day and survived till the end. Let's know about the characters. The narrator, Gordon Cook, he is a 37-year-old businessman. He wants to duplicate the round-the-world journey made by Captain James Cook 200 years earlier. He spends a long time improving his sea skills and finally begins his journey with his wife Mary, 6-year-old son Jonathan, and 7-year-old daughter Suzanne. Mary, she is the narrator's wife. She supports her husband's dream and improves her sea skills. She joins her husband on their planned 3-year voyage. An American, Larry Vigil, an American who joins the narrator and Mary at Cape Town to help them tackle one of the world's roughest seas. Herb Ziegler, a Swiss who also joins them at Cape Town to help them cross the southern Indian Ocean. Suzanne, the narrator's 7-year-old daughter, who displays immense courage throughout their voyage. Jonathan, he is the narrator's 6-year-old son, who shows immense strength and optimism even in difficult times. Children, for your reference, here I have given few phrases and expressions. Please note it down, write it down in your notebook. Let's start explanation of the chapter. But before that, for your knowledge, here I have kept a figure of a boat which you have a same in the textbook. Please write down all these names at its proper place. Here I have kept for your reference the map of the first voyage of Captain James Cook. The same author wants to copy, so he started his journey on the same route, from the same point, but unfortunately he was not able to reach. In July 76, my wife Mary, son Jonathan, 6, daughter Suzanne, 7, and I set sail from Plymouth, England, to duplicate the round-the-world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 37-year-old businessman, had dreamed of sailing in the wake of the famous explorer. And for the past 16 years, we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. Children, this story is a story of extreme courage and skill exhibited by Gordon Cook, his family and crewmen in a war with water and waves for survival. The narrator is saying to his readers that in July 1976 they started their journey by sea. They were four people: he himself, his wife Mary, son Jonathan, and his daughter Suzanne. His age was 37 and his son was 6 years old and his daughter was 7 years old. They were trying to copy the round the world voyage made by Captain James Cook about 200 years ago. They started their journey from Plymouth in England. The narrator further said that he is of 37 years and he is a businessman. For a very long time, he and his wife had a dream. They wanted to do some voyage as earlier completed by the famous traveler James Cook. They had spent all their free time in improving their skills to travel by sea. They were doing practice in the sea area of Britain since last 16 years. Author further said that in the text that our boat Wavewalker, a 23-meter 30-ton wooden hulled beauty, had been professionally built and we had spent months fitting it out and tasting it in the roughest weather we could find. The name of their boat was Wavewalker. It was 23 meter long and its weight was 30 ton, almost 1016.05 kg. And the ship was built by people expert in building ships. They had installed many more things in the ship for a comfortable living. They had even tasted the ship in the most difficult and unpleasant weather. The first leg of our planned 3-year 105,000 kilometer journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. There, before heading east, we took on two crewmen, American Larry Vigil and Swiss Herb Ziegler, to help us tackle one of the world's toughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. The first part they had planned a voyage of 105,000 kilometers. The first part of their journey was from Britain to Cape Town, situated along west coast of Africa. They did not face any trouble during this part of the journey. Before going in east direction from there, they included two more voyagers, Larry Vigil and Herb Ziegler, in their team. Larry was from America and Herb was from Switzerland. They would help the narrator's family in their journey in managing the Southern Indian Ocean, which is the most difficult sea in the world. On our second day, out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves was alarming, up to 15 meters, as high as our mast. 2 days after starting from Cape Town, they started experiencing strong winds. Strong winds flowed continuously for next couple of weeks. The author was not worried because of strong winds. Only the height of wave was a cause to worry. They were up to 15 meters high as the main mast of their ship. December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Despite atrocious weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with a Christmas tree. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had a change soon. And it did change for the worse. On December 25, they had traveled 3,500 kilometers from Cape Town in the east direction. Although the weather was very bad, they celebrated Christmas on the ship with a Christmas tree. They hoped and thought that weather would change, but the weather changed and it became worse. At dawn on January 2nd, the waves were gigantic. We were sailing with only a small storm jib and we were still making 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless, enormous seas rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. Then we double lashed everything and went through our life raft drill, attached lifelines, donned oilskins and life jackets, and waited. In the morning of January 2nd, the waves were very huge. They had put up a small sail on the ship because winds were blowing fast. In spite of very small sail, they were moving at the speed of 8 knots per hour. 1 knot per hour is equal to 1.85 km per hour. Whenever the ship moved on top of a wave, they could see the endless area of sea. Because of waves, it looked as if the whole sea was moving towards the ship. The loud voice of wind and spray of water droplets was very painful to ears to them. To reduce speed of the boat, they moved the storm jib. They tied a heavy rope at the back of the ship. Then they tied everything twice. They did not want things to fall. They practiced use of lifeboat. They attached lifelines in the ship to save themselves from falling. They wore oilskins and life jackets. Then they waited. They had prepared themselves for the worst situation. The first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. The wind dropped and the sky immediately grew dark. Then came a growing roar and an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship. With horror, I realized that it was not a cloud, but a wave like no other I had ever seen. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of the other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. The first indication of the upcoming problem came at about 6 p.m. There was total and unfavorable silence. Wind stopped blowing and the sky became dark. Then they could hear a loud sound. A very big cloud was covering the front portion of the ship. When the narrator looked at it, he understood that it was not a cloud but a very big wave. He had never seen such a big wave. He was afraid. The wave was perfectly vertical, perfectly straight. It was about twice the height of other waves. It stopped, most portions started breaking itself. It was such a fearful sight. The roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave, and for a moment I thought we might ride over it. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. I accepted my approaching death, and as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. The sound of the wave increased to the level of a thunder. While the wave approached the ship, the front portion of the ship moved up. He thought the ship would sail over the wave, but suddenly there was a huge sound. The whole body of the ship was shaken. A huge quantity of green and white water fell in the ship. The narrator could feel that he was being thrown to higher level of the ship, but he was sinking in water. The author was thrown into the sea by the force of wave of water. He felt he was about to die. He was becoming unconscious. He felt peaceful. Unexpectedly, my head popped out of the water. A few meters away, Wave Walker was near capsizing, her mast almost horizontal. Then a wave hurled up her upright. My lifeline jerked taut. I grabbed the guards rails and sailed through the air into Wave Walker's main boom. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. My left ribs cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow I found the wheel lined up the stern for the next wave and hung on. Though the narrator did not expect, his head came out of the sea water. At a distance of some meters, the ship wave walker had turned to its side and was sinking. Its mast, that used to be straight, had become almost horizontal. Then, by the force of a wave, the ship again became straight. His lifeline gave a jerk to him and he jumped into the air and he landed in the boom part of the ship. The lifeline of the author was tied to the ship. When the ship straightened, the lifeline was pulled towards the ship. Author got pulled into the air and landed in the ship. Waves coming after the first wave tossed him in the deck and he was being tossed like a rag doll. His left rib got fractured. His mouth was filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow he reached the wheel of the ship. He reached the back portion of the ship and remained there to face the next wave. Water, water everywhere. I could feel that ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. Suddenly the front hatch was thrown open and Mary appeared. "We are sinking," she screamed. "The decks are smashed. We are full of water." Everywhere in the ship there was water. He could understand that lower portion of the ship were filled with water, but he did not have courage to leave the wheel and go there to find out. Suddenly, the door in front of him opened. He saw his wife Mary standing in the door. In a loud voice, she told him that the ship was sinking. The floor of the ship was broken and the ship was full of water. "Take the wheel," I shouted as I scrambled for the hatch. Larry and Herb were pumping like madmen. Broken timbers hung at crazy angles, and the whole starboard side bulged inwards. Clothes, crockery, charts, tins, toys sloshed about in deep water. The narrator instructed her to take control of the wheel of the ship. With difficulty, he started walking towards the door. Larry and Herb were pumping the water out of ship. They were working to the best of their ability. Broken wood was hanging at different awkward angles. The right side of the ship was swollen inwards. Clothes, crockery, charts, tins, and toys were moving in the water. Water was quite deep in the ship. I half swam, half crawled into the children's cabin. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yes," they answered from an upper bunk. "But my head hurts a bit," said Sue, pointing to a big bump over her eyes. I had no time to worry about her bump heads. The narrator was swimming as well as crawling in the ship. He entered the cabin of his children. He asked them if they were all right. They were on the upper bed and replied that they were okay. His daughter Sue told him that she had a swollen part just above her eyes. He said nothing to bother about the swollen head. After finding a hammer, screws, and canvas, I struggled back on deck. With the starboard side best open, we were taking water with each wave that broke over us. If I could not make some repairs, we would surely sink. The author took a hammer, some screws, and canvas with him. With great difficulty, he came to the main floor of the ship. The right side of the ship was broken by the force of the first wave. Therefore, because of every other wave, water was entering into the ship. If he did not do some repairs, the ship would surely sink. Somehow, I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers across the gaping holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was now being deflected over the side. Somehow, the author could stretch the canvas across the gap, then he fixed the waterproof door cross over the big holes. Some water still continued to go to the some level of the ship, but most of the water that came on the floor was how going out over side of the ship. More problem arose when our hand pump started to block up with the debris floating around the cabins and the electric pump short circuited. The water level rose threateningly back on deck, and I found that our two spare hand pumps had been wrenched overboard. Along with the forestay sail, the jib, and the dinghies and the main anchor. Their problems increased when hand pumps got choked due to various materials floating in water. The electric pumps developed faults so could not be operated. The level of water in the ship started rising alarmingly. The author came back to the floor of the ship. He found that two extra pumps had been thrown up there by the waves. Some other materials like sail jib and boats were also lying there. Then I remembered we had another electric pump under the chart room floor. I connected it to an outpipe and was thankful to find that it worked. Then the author suddenly recalled that they had one more electric pump under the floor of their chart room. He connected that pump to a pipe to pump water out of the ship. Thankfully, that pump was working. The night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, steering, and working the radio. We were getting no replies to our Mayday calls, which was not surprising in this remote corner of the world. Sue's head had swollen alarmingly. She had two enormous black eyes, and now she showed us a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why she had not made more of her injuries before this, she replied, I did not want to worry you when you were trying to save us all. Throughout the night, they followed the routine of pumping of water, directing the ship in right way, and giving signal on wireless radio. They did not get any response to their emergency calls through the wireless radio. They were not surprised because they were in a remote part of the world. Swelling on the head of Sue had become a cause of worry. Her eyes looked very than she big than bigger than before. She told them that she had a cut on her arm. The author asked her why she had not told him before about her injuries. She replied that she did not want to bother them because the author was trying to save life of all of them. By morning on January 3, the pumps had the water levels sufficiently under control for us to take 2 hours rest in rotation. But we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line, and on checking, I found that nearly all the boat's main rib frames were smashed down to the nil. In fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few cupboard partitions. By the morning of 3rd January, good quantity of water had been pumped out of the ship. It was under control. So, one by one, they took 2 hour rest. Even then, there was a huge amount of leakage of water into the ship from below the level of water. They found out the main frame of the ship was broken up to the bottom most portion of the ship. Actually, everything was broken at least to some extent in the right side of the ship. Only some of the partitions of cupboards made of the body of the ship were not broken. We had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit, but Wave Walker would not hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. I checked our charts and calculated that there were 2 small islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. One of them, Amsterdam, was a French scientific base. Our only hope was to reach these pinpricks in the vast ocean. But unless the wind and the seas abated so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. The great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action. The ship had not sunk during the 15 hours after the first wave had hit the ship. Thus, they all were alive. They knew that the ship wave walker would break or sink before they could reach Australia. The author checked maps. He calculated that couple of 100 kilometers from them there were 2 islands. Those were in the east direction. Name of one of the islands was Amsterdam. On that island, France had established a study center of science. Our hope of survival depended upon reaching this small island in the huge ocean. But they would not be able to raise their sail until the wind reduced the sea and became calm. Their extra engines were damaged by the big wave that had hit their ship. Without raising the sail, their chance of reaching the island was very low. On January 4, after 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. Now we had only to keep pace with the water still coming in, and we could not set any sail on the main mast. Pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So we hoisted the storm jib and headed for where I thought the 2 islands were. Mary found some corned beef and crackle biscuits, and we ate our first meal in almost 2 days. They had been pumping water continuously for 36 hours. Then it was 4th January, only some centimeter depth of water was in the ship. Even more, then they had to maintain speed of pumping out of water to that was coming into the ship. All extra water had been pumped out. Due to high speed of wind, they could not install sail on the main mast. Because that would had put lot of pressure on the ropes that ties sail with outer body of the ship. Such pressure would have broken the outer body of the ship, so they raised a storm jib. The author thought that they had started moving in the direction of 2 islands. The author's wife Mary found some salted meat and some packed bread. They ate their first food after about 2 days. But our respite was short lived. At 4 p.m., black clouds began building up behind us. Within the hour, the wind was back to 40 knots and the seas were getting higher. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and by dawn on January 5, our situation was again desperate. But the relief was for a short time only. At 4 p.m., black clouds started coming from behind the ship. Within 1 hour, the wind was once again blowing at the speed of 40 knots. The waves were becoming bigger and bigger, and the weather continued to become bad during the night. By next morning, their condition had once again became miserable. When I went in to comfort the children, John asked, Daddy, are we going to die? I tried to assure him that we could make it, but Daddy, he went on, we are not afraid of dying if we can all be together. You and Mummy, Sue, and I. The author went into the kids' room to give emotional support to his kids. His son John asked him if they were about to die. The author tried to give him an assurance that they would come out of that bad situation. He further told him that the kids were not afraid of dying if they all were together. The author, his wife, Sue, and John himself. I could find no words with which to respond, but I left the children's cabin determined to fight the sea with everything I had. To protect the weekend starboard side, I decided to heave to, with the undamaged port hull facing the oncoming waves, using an impoverished sea anchor of heavy nylon rope and two 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. The author did not know how to reply to his son. He came out of the room of his children. He was determined to fight the bad weather to the best his ability. To protect the weak right side of the ship, he decided to reduce the speed of the ship. He moved the ship in such a way that the undamaged part of the front portion was facing waves. He used a thick nylon rope to tie two 22-liter wax drums with it. He used that as an anchor to reduce the speed. That evening, Mary and I sat together holding hands as the motion of the ship brought more and more water in through the broken planks. We both felt the end was very near. That evening, the author and his wife Mary sat together. They were holding hands of each other. With every movement of ship, more water was coming into the ship. They both felt that soon the ship would sink and they all would die. But Wavewalker rode out of the storm, and by the morning of January 6, with the wind easing, I tried to get a reading on the sextant. Back in the chart room, I worked on wind speeds, changes of course, drift, and current in an effort to calculate our position. The best I could determine was that we were somewhere in 150,000 kilometers of ocean looking for a 65-kilometer wide island. But the ship Wave Walker came out of the storm. By the morning of 6 January, speed of the wind had reduced. The author tried to determine the direction by measuring an angle through sextant. Sextant, children, is an instrument used for measuring an angular distance. He went to the chart room. He considered speed of wind, change of direction, movement of ship, and direction of waves to calculate position of their ship. He calculated that they were in the ocean that had 150,000 square kilometer area, and they were trying to search an island that had an area of 65 square kilometer. While I was sinking, Sue, moving painfully, joined me. The left side of her head was now very swollen, and her blackened eyes narrowed to slits. She gave me a card she had made. When the author was doing such calculations, his daughter Sue came near him. She was suffering from lot of pain due to injury. Her head was then more swollen. She could open her eyes only slightly. Her eyes had become black. She had made a card. She gave me that card. On the front, she had drawn caricatures of Mary and me with the words, "Here are some funny people. Did they make you laugh?" I laughed a lot as well. inside was a message, "Oh, how I love you both." So, this card is to say thank you and let's hope for the best. Somehow, we had to make it. On the front of the card, she had made photo of Mary. She had written words for them. Those were some funny people. They always made people laugh. The narrator also laughed a lot, meaning that she was proud of her parents because they were fighting against a very bad situation. Inside the card, the message was written. The kids had written they love their both parents. Through that card, kids wanted to thank their parents. The author was thinking that let it with them, the best would happen to them. Somehow they need to overcome that difficult situation. Sue was trying to motivate her parents. I checked and reached my calculations. We had lost our main compass and I was using a spare which had not been corrected for magnetic variation. I made an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of the westerly currents and which flow through this part of the Indian Ocean. The author checked his calculations. He checked them many times. They had lost their main compass. The author was using the extra compass they had. He was using the extra compass they had, but that compass was not accurate. It had an error because of its magnet. He made a provision for that error in his calculations. He also made an estimate about the effect of waves that move towards west in this part of the Indian Ocean. About 2 p.m., I went on deck and asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. If we were lucky, I told him with a conviction I did not feel, he could expect to see the island at about 5 p.m. At about 2 p.m., he went to the main floor of the ship. The narrator asked to move the ship in the direction of 185-degree angle. If they were lucky, they should be able to see the islands by about 5 p.m. Although the narrator was not confident about it, but the narrator told Larry as if it was his strong opinion that they would reach about 5 p.m. Then, with a heavy heart, I went below, climbed on my bunk, and amazingly dozed off. When I woke, it was 6 p.m. and growing dark. I knew we must have missed the island, and with the sail we had left, we could not hope to beat back into the westerly winds. Then, with lot of sadness in his heart, the author went to lower floor of the ship. He climbed on his bed and surprisingly he slept. He woke up at 6 p.m. It had started becoming dark. The narrator was certain that they did not see the island with the sail available with them. It was not possible to go back because the winds were blowing in west direction. At that moment, a tousled head appeared on my bunk. "Can I have a hug?" Jonathan asked. Sue was right behind him. "Why am I getting a hug now?" I asked. "Because you are the best daddy in the whole world and the best captain," my son replied. "Not today, John, I am afraid." "Why you must be," said the Sioux in a matter-of-fact voice. "You found the island." "What?" I shouted. "It's out there in front of us," they chorused, "as big as a battleship." At that moment, a head of the face that had uncombed hair came to his bed. His son Jonathan asked him if he could give him a hug. Sue was also with him. The author asked him why he wanted to give him a hug. His son told him that he was the best father in the whole world. He was the best captain of a ship in that world. The narrator replied that he was sorry but that day he was not the best. The narrator's daughter Sue said in an unemotional voice that he should feel that he was the best. The narrator had found the island. He was surprised. They said together that the island was in front of them. It was looking like a big warship. I rushed on the deck and gazed with relief at the stark outline of Amsterdam. It was only a bleak piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, the most beautiful island in the world. The author quickly went to the deck. He looked at the clear outlines of Amsterdam Island. It was a big relief. It was a dull island having only rocks. It did not have many trees and plants, but it was the most beautiful island of the world. We anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning, all 28 inhabitants of the islands cheered us. They helped us ashore. With land under my feet again, my thoughts were full of Larry and Herbie, cheerful and optimistic, under the direst stress, and of Mary, who stayed at the wheel for all those crucial hours. Most of all, I thought of a 7-year-old girl who did not want us to worry about a head injury, which subsequently took 6 minor operations to remove a recurring blood clot between skin and skull, and of a 6-year-old boy who was not afraid to die. They stopped the ship in the sea at the location for the night, and next morning, all the 28 inhabitants of the island helped them to come on the land. When the narrator reached the island, he started appreciating Larry and Herbie. They remained happy and hopeful even under the very high level of stress. He also thought of Mary, who had controlled wheel of the ship during very critical time. The author Gordon Cook thought most about a 7-year-old girl. She did not want them to bother about her head injury. Later, that injury required 6 minor operations. These were required to control repeated formation of blood clot between her skull and skin. The author also thought a lot about a 6-year-old boy who was not afraid to die. So, children, here is the story ended with the great courage and bravery the family has shown during their voyage. And for your kind reference, here I have kept textual exercise, textual question answers. Please write down in your notebook and learn well for your upcoming examinations. All these answers are important and you need to write it down. Thank you.